Hello, I'm Noel Clehane, the Global Head of Regulatory and Public Policy for BDO, the professional services organisation, and I'm delighted to share my thoughts with you on this interview today on a few ASEAN-related matters. Yeah, well, in the first instance, our firms as professional advisors and auditors have had to adapt to servicing our clients remotely by using technology. We were fortunate in that significant investment in our digital tools over the years allowed us to switch almost immediately to teleworking. So there was little time lost in getting our people up and running remotely. From an advisory perspective, businesses across ASEAN and indeed everywhere sought assistance with business continuity support, including on how to access government support for the economy, how to cut costs, to manage cash, how to negotiate the many barriers to cross-border trade that went up, and how to rework their business strategies and adapt to the new normal, as it were. On the more traditional service of auditing, our part in corporate reporting system remains just as necessary even during a pandemic. All ASEAN economies need a reliable flow of audited information to function. And while COVID created new challenges for the financial reporting ecosystem, the audit profession was found to be resilient and responsive across the region. One of the main challenges we faced was making judgments on asset valuations and on the going concern assessment of businesses in a fast-changing and unpredictable environment. But overall, I think the accounting profession performed well in ASEAN throughout the COVID period. There are so many ways in which the EU and ASEAN have been collaborating already to mitigate the shock, both human and economic, and so many others which they can do to ensure a synchronized and strong economic recovery. The EU and ASEAN are very natural partners. Both are supporters of rules-based international order. Both are large trading blocs in a world where free and fair trade is under threat. So speedily dismantling any hurdles to business that arose when the pandemic struck would be an obvious area. I'm thinking of, for example, coordinated reopening of air travel to facilitate the resumption of business. I'm thinking of the new customs transit system under Arise Plus, a root and branch review maybe of non-trade barriers and non-trade measures that inhibit trade between the blocs, and elimination of any tariffs and costs, particularly on all essential goods such as PPE, medicines and components for medical devices. A very pragmatic example would be the elimination of paper associated with trade. But thinking a little bit longer term, I think injecting greater urgency into bilateral trade negotiations between the EU and ASEAN members and elevating the relationship to a strategic partnership could all lubricate the pathway to a region-to-region free trade agreement, building on the Singapore and Vietnam free trade agreements now in place. I know there's a great awareness of this already in Brussels, and much practical collaboration is already happening, including continued financial support from the EU to ASEAN and its member states. And I think it's a great opportunity for EU and ASEAN to take their relationship to a new high after over 40 years of established relations. Well, there's no doubt in my mind that ASEAN needs to drive its economic integration harder if it's to come out of the COVID era stronger and recover the economic loss suffered. I heard it described recently as ASEAN finally deciding to operationalize its cooperation commitments. I think it's fair to say that the ASEAN Economic Community blueprint has not been moving forward at pace, and you could say that in some areas it's stalled. So concerted effort definitely needed to get momentum on that. I've already mentioned non-trade barriers and other obstacles to efficient international trade, but in fact, intra-regional barriers and other kind of protectionist measures that cause friction between ASEAN members need to be eliminated also. I think facilitating trade rather than taxing it needs to become more intuitive and widespread across the region, and arriving maybe at consolidated policy positions on economic matters. For example, how to enable digital and other services trade across barriers would be very useful. Linking policies to the sustainability agenda in its many guises would also help to drive growth, and perhaps Europe could also help in transposing some of the more workable ideas in the EU Green Deal to support ASEAN efforts in its green recovery. Coming from the world of accountancy, I might add that there's also probably a pressing need to help build accounting capacity in some of the less developed ASEAN members. It's a prerequisite for any economy to have an adequate pool of professional accountants to help businesses navigate the difficult economic times and to position themselves for the opportunities in the future. In that regard, I'd also like to see maybe greater professional mobility and qualifications recognition. But on a more pragmatic day-to-day level, small businesses need access to finance, so measures to support bank lending to those would be helpful also.